I stood in the foyer of the country club, smoothing the fabric of my long, beige trench coat. I was 66 years old, a widow of 10 years, and today was my only son's wedding. The string quartet was already playing in the main hall. Guests were taking their seats. Estelle, wait. I turned. Sophie, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, marched toward me. Her white gown dragged across the marble floor. Max, my son, trailed behind her, looking everywhere but at me. Sophie stopped 2 feet away, her eyes raking over my beige trench coat. Her lips pressed into a thin, disappointed line. "Mom, your clothes are too old-fashioned," she muttered, her tone dripping with annoyance. "You're wearing a raincoat to my wedding." "Don't embarrass us. The photographer is taking family portraits right now, and you look like you're waiting for a bus." I glanced at Max. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, maybe you could just stand in the back row?" Sophie worked really hard on the aesthetic. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my fashion choices. I just smiled, calmly undid the large tortoiseshell buttons of my coat, and slipped it off my shoulders. What everyone saw next threw the entire wedding into chaos. Underneath that dull coat, I wore a custom-tailored floor-length gown. It was deep emerald green, constructed entirely from the vintage military dress uniforms my late husband had worn throughout his career. I had spent 6 months carefully taking apart the heavy wool, refitting the gold braiding, and restructuring the silhouette into a breathtaking, elegant evening dress. The brass buttons gleamed under the chandelier. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd in the foyer. Several older guests immediately recognized the military insignias subtly woven into the cuffs. Sophie's jaw dropped. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. The photographer hired by Sophie's family completely ignored the bride and rushed over snapping photos of my dress. "Who made that?" the photographer asked, adjusting his lens. "I did," I replied, handing my coat to a stunned waiter. I looked back at Sophie. "Is this better?" Sophie stared at me, her hands clenching the delicate tulle of her own skirt. She wanted an old-fashioned, frumpy mother-in-law to blend into the background. Instead, she got a walking piece of history that had completely hijacked the photographer's attention. "It's inappropriate," Sophie hissed, stepping closer so the guests wouldn't hear. "It's entirely too flashy. You are trying to steal my spotlight." I adjusted a gold button on my sleeve. "It's my husband's uniform. I thought his memory should be here when his son gets married." I didn't realize honoring a veteran was considered flashy. A few of the groom's extended family members had already crowded around complimenting the tailoring. The chaos wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Everyone was looking at me, not the bride. Max finally stepped between us, looking panicked. "Mom, please, just go sit down. Far in the back. You're upsetting Sophie, and her parents paid for this venue." I looked at my son, 30 years old, wearing a rented tuxedo, bowing to the demands of a woman who cared more about a photo aesthetic than family. I didn't feel like crying. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. "Of course, Max," I stated. I walked into the hall, bypassed the front row, reserved for the groom's mother, and took a seat in the very last row next to the exit doors. I watched the ceremony from a distance. I watched Max put a ring on Sophie's finger. I clapped politely when they kissed. When the reception started and the guests moved to the dining room, I didn't follow. I walked back to the coat check, retrieved my beige trench coat, and walked out to my car. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't throw a fit. I just left. As I drove back to my quiet, paid-off house, I felt a strange sense of relief. My duty as a mother raising a child was officially over. Now it was time to clean house. I parked my car, unlocked my front door, and walked straight to my home office. I had some computer work to do. The house was perfectly quiet. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. For the last 3 years, I had been helping out Max. He had a decent job, but Sophie had expensive tastes. To keep the peace, I had kept my credit card linked to his auto insurance account. I also paid the monthly lease on the SUV Sophie drove, and I had generously set up a weekly auto transfer to their joint savings account to help fund their 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives. I logged into my banking portal. I didn't feel angry. I just felt intensely practical. Max had clearly chosen his priority. He had a wife now. He didn't need his mother standing in the back row, and he certainly didn't need his mother's wallet. Click. The auto transfer to their honeymoon fund was canceled. Click. The credit card linked to the SUV lease was unlinked and reported as restricted for future vehicle payments. Click. I removed Max as an authorized user on my emergency credit card. I closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and went to the garage. My husband's 1969 Mustang sat under a canvas cover. Max had always assumed the car would be his. He called it his inheritance. Sophie had already mentioned wanting to sell it to upgrade their kitchen appliances once it officially belonged to Max. I pulled the canvas cover off. The paint was pristine. I grabbed my phone and found the number of a local classic car collector who had left a flyer on my windshield at a grocery store 2 years ago. I dialed the number. A man picked up on the second ring. "Hello, my name is Estelle," I said calmly. "I have a '69 Mustang in mint condition. If you bring a flatbed and a cashier's check today, it's yours." We agreed on a price within 5 minutes. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Max. I ignored it, picked up a dust cloth, and started wiping down the Mustang's dashboard. He would call back. They always do when the money stops. The phone rang again at 11:00 a.m. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. "Mom, what is going on?" Max's voice was frantic. In the background, I could hear airport announcements. They were supposed to be boarding their flight to the Maldives. "Good morning, Max." "How was the rest of the reception?" I asked. The reception was fine. Mom Sophie's card just declined at the airline lounge. I checked our accounts, and the honeymoon fund is short. The transfer didn't go through. "Did you change your bank settings?" "Yes, I did," I replied. Walking into the living room and adjusting a picture frame, I canceled all the automatic transfers. I also stopped paying for Sophie's car lease. Dead silence on the line. Then Sophie's shrill voice echoed as she snatched the phone from Max. "Estelle, are you kidding me right now? You ruined my wedding photos yesterday, and now you're cutting off our accounts while we are at the airport." "I didn't ruin your photos, Sophie." I sat in the back exactly as requested. I kept my voice perfectly level. "And as for the accounts, Max is a married man now. You two are starting a family. It's highly inappropriate for me to be managing a married man's car lease and vacation fund. I'm old-fashioned that way. We need that money to upgrade our hotel suite," Sophie demanded. "That sounds like a budgeting issue. Enjoy your flight. Don't you dare hang up. When we get back in 2 weeks, we are coming straight to your house to sort this out. We are taking the Mustang to sell, since you clearly don't care about helping us anymore." "Have a safe trip," I said, and pressed the red button on my screen. I put the phone in my pocket. 2 weeks. That gave me exactly 14 days to completely detach my life from theirs. I walked into the guest room, which still held boxes of Max's high school trophies and old clothes. It was time to pack up the past. I spent the next 3 days moving methodically through my house. I didn't rush and I didn't exhaust myself. I just worked with purpose. I bought 10 heavy-duty plastic storage bins from the hardware store. Into them went everything that belonged to Max. His old baseball gloves, his college textbooks, his winter coats, the video game consoles he left in the basement. I taped the bins shut and stacked them neatly in the hallway near the front door. On Wednesday afternoon, the classic car collector arrived. He walked around the Mustang, inspected the engine, and didn't even try to haggle. He handed me a cashier's check for $45,000. I handed him the keys and the signed title. I watched the flatbed truck tow the car down the street. The garage looked surprisingly spacious without it. On Thursday, I went to my bank. I deposited the check directly into a high-yield savings account under my name only. While I was there, I rented a safe deposit box. I drove home, gathered the family heirloom silver, my jewelry, and the antique watches my husband had collected. I brought them straight back to the bank and locked them in the vault. Sophie had once walked through my dining room pointing at the silver, casually mentioning how great it would look in her modern display cabinet. That wasn't happening. The house felt lighter. It felt like mine again. I didn't sit around waiting for their return. I joined a morning walking group in my neighborhood. I started reading the stack of novels I had ignored for years. I stopped checking my phone for messages that were only ever requests for money. On the 14th day, right on schedule, a rideshare car pulled up to my driveway. The honeymoon was over. Max and Sophie had arrived. I watched from the kitchen window as they hauled their suitcases up my walkway, their faces dark like thunderclouds. I poured myself a fresh glass of iced tea, unlocked the front door, and waited in the foyer. Max pushed the front door open without knocking. Sophie stormed in right behind him, dropping her designer travel bag on my hardwood floor with a loud thud. "Mom, we need to talk," Max announced, trying to sound authoritative, but mostly just looking tired. "Hello, Max." "Sophie." "I see you made it back safely." I took a sip of my iced tea. Sophie didn't bother with pleasantries. She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "We had to downgrade our room in the Maldives because you cut off the funding. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? And the dealership called me about the SUV lease. You have a lot of explaining to do, Estelle." I didn't flinch. I pointed to the stack of 10 plastic bins lining the hallway wall. "I packed up the rest of your childhood things, Max. You can load them into the rideshare, or you can come back with a truck later. But they need to be out of my hallway by tomorrow." Max stared at the bins, bewildered. "What is this? Are you kicking my stuff out? You don't live here anymore. It's time your belongings lived with you." Sophie rolled her eyes, stepping past me to look into the dining room. She noticed the empty glass display cabinet immediately. "Where is the silver tea set?" "We were going to take that today for the new apartment." "The silver is safely locked in a bank vault," I answered smoothly. "It belongs to me." Sophie's face hardened. "Fine. Whatever. Keep the old silver. Max, just go get the keys to the Mustang. We already listed it online while we were at the airport. We have a buyer coming to look at it tomorrow morning. We need the cash to cover the credit card debt from the honeymoon." Max looked at me expectantly, holding his hand out. "Mom, just give me the garage keys. Let's get this over with." I smiled, a small, quiet curve of my lips. "Walk with me to the garage, Max." I opened the heavy fire door leading from the kitchen into the garage. I flipped the light switch. The fluorescent bulbs hummed to life, illuminating the spotless concrete floor. Aside from my small sedan parked on the right side, the garage was completely empty. No canvas cover, no classic car. Max froze in the doorway. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if the car was just invisible. Where is it? Did you take it to the mechanic?" Sophie pushed past him, her eyes darting around the empty space. "Estelle, where is the Mustang? I sold it," I stated plainly. "You... what?" Max's voice cracked. He gripped the door frame. "Mom, that was my car. Dad left that for me." "Your father left the entire estate to me, Max." "It was my car." I corrected him without raising my voice. "I held onto it because I thought you appreciated its history. But since Sophie informed me at the wedding that my vintage tastes are an embarrassment, I decided to be practical." I sold it to a collector. Sophie looked like she might explode. You sold our car. We already mentally budgeted that money. How much did you get for it? You need to write us a check right now. I turned to look directly at her. I don't need to do anything. The funds are in my retirement account. I'm an old-fashioned woman, Sophie. I need practical savings to support myself, especially since I no longer have a son I can rely on. Max looked gutted. Mom, you're doing this to punish us because of the wedding. I'm doing this to protect myself, I replied. You allowed your wife to humiliate me over a dress I made to honor your father. You told me to sit in the back. You showed me exactly where I stand in your life. I am simply adjusting my finances to match that position. Sophie stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at me. If you don't give us that money, you will never see us again. Sophie's threat hung in the air, echoing slightly in the empty garage. She expected me to crumble. She expected the typical mother's panic, the desperate pleading to stay in my son's life, the immediate offering of a checkbook to buy their presents. I looked at her pointed finger, then at Max, who was staring at his shoes, letting his wife fight his battles. If that is your choice, I respect it, I answered effortlessly. Sophie's arm dropped. She blinked, genuinely shocked. What? I said, I respect your choice. If you don't want to see me, you don't have to. I stepped back into this kitchen and waited for them to follow. Once they were inside, I held my hand out toward Max. Since you won't be visiting, I'll need my spare house key back. Max looked up, his eyes wide. Mom, you don't mean this? I do, Max. The key, please. He reached into his pocket, his hand shaking slightly, and pulled out his key ring. He slowly detached the brass key and placed it in my palm. Thank you, I said. I walked over to the front door, right next to where they were standing. 2 days ago, I had a locksmith install a new electronic keypad lock. I hadn't activated it yet. Right in front of them, I pulled the battery tab, typed in a new master code, and pressed the lock button. The heavy deadbolt slid into place with a loud mechanical clack. The plastic bins are yours? I pointed to the hallway. I suggest you start carrying them to the curb. Your rideshare driver looks like he's getting impatient. Sophie grabbed Max's arm. Let's go, Max. She's insane. She'll regret this when she's old and alone. I'm already old, Sophie, I replied, opening the door for them. And I'd rather be alone than used. Take the boxes. Max silently picked up the first 2 bins. He didn't look at me as he carried them out. For the first time in 30 years, my house was entirely mine. No lingering expectations. No sudden demands for cash. No tiptoeing around someone else's moods. Weeks turned into months. I didn't sit by the phone and I didn't cry. I kept busy. I joined a local quilting and sewing guild, putting my tailoring skills to good use. We made blankets for the local children's hospital, and I even started selling some of my vintage upcycled clothing at weekend craft fairs. The money from the Mustang generated a comfortable yield in my savings account. My retirement was secure. Max tried to test the boundary twice. The first time he showed up unannounced on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my living room reading. I watched him through the peephole. He tried to use his old key on the doorknob, then realized the deadbolt was entirely controlled by the keypad. He punched in his birthday. It flashed red. He punched in my birthday. Red again. He stood on the porch for 10 minutes looking lost before finally ringing the doorbell. I didn't answer. I simply turned off the porch light. He walked back to his car and drove away. The second time was 6 months later. I was planting hydrangeas in the front yard when his car pulled up to the curb. He got out alone. He looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped and he had dark circles under his eyes. Sophie was nowhere in sight. He walked up the driveway, stopping a few feet from my garden bed. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I paused, resting my trowel in the dirt. I wiped my hands on my gardening apron. Hello, Max? You look tired. I am, he admitted, rubbing his face. He looked at the house, then at the keypad on the door. You really locked me out. I secured my home, I corrected him. What do you want, Max? He swallowed hard. I need a favor. Just a small one. I stood up, brushing the soil from my knees. What kind of favor? Max couldn't meet my eyes. Sophie maxed out her credit cards again. The lease on her SUV is up, and she wants to finance a luxury crossover. My paycheck doesn't cover the down payment. I just need a $5,000 loan, Mom. I swear I'll pay you back. I looked at the boy I had raised. He had chosen a life of maintaining appearances, and it was draining the life out of him. But that was his burden, not mine. No, I said firmly. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Mom, please. She's been miserable. We've been fighting constantly. I'm sorry to hear that, Max. Marriage is difficult. But my finances are no longer available for your wife's lifestyle. I am on a fixed income, and I am prioritizing my own peace of mind. You have the car money. He blurted out, a hint of resentment slipping through. Yes, I do. And it is staying in the bank. I took off my gardening gloves. I am making a fresh pot of coffee. You are welcome to come inside, sit at the kitchen table, and drink a cup with me. We can talk about your job, or baseball, or the weather. But if you walk through that door, you do not ask for money. If you can't accept those terms, you need to leave. Max stood on the driveway for a long time. He looked at the open front door, smelling the faint scent of coffee wafting out. He looked like he wanted to step forward to just be my son for an hour. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his shoulders slumped even further. I can't, Mom. I have to go, he whispered. Drive safely, Max. I watched him get into his car and drive away. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt a profound, quiet strength. I walked inside my peaceful home, locked the door behind me, and poured myself a cup of coffee.